need to open up just quickly. Alva, you in the audience here? Yes. I'm sorry. 21 years ago when I started as an intern, it was the case that 4 of us were in college, and when in college you don't have a lot of food. You and Ed and Steve would meet for meetings at lunch. In the executive hallway, Steve would always order sushi platters. And we would rate ourselves as a vulture, a coyote, or a leopard if we came to go poach your sushi at 1:30 post-meeting, 12:15 during meeting, or a leopard at 11:45 before meeting. Walk by, ooh, hamachi, what's up? So sorry for the missing sushi 20 years ago. I'll buy you sushi this afternoon, I'm sorry. All right. True story.
Awesome.
Steve never caught me.
Luckily. So the name of our session here is Own the Process, Don't Let the Process Own You. And can you give us a little bit of sort of the overview of what that really means?
I think there's a lot of talk you see in startup culture, technology journals, and business journals as well about the way in which people approach a problem, the size of team you bring to bear to it, the level of organizational infrastructure and management you put in a process or not.
Yes.
We should go lean, we should not go lean. We debate about big companies versus small companies a lot. And certainly my journey through 20 years at Pixar, and we did overlap a couple years with Alvy at the beginning. But I sort of pick up where your talk kind of ended, worked on Toy Story and on through. Being on so many big film projects and seeing how those things themselves sort of internally evolve over time actually reminded me quite a lot of the first talk this morning, talking about 08 to 12 and the election technologies that were brought to bear. Yeah. The 4-year cycle is about a film, it turns out. And the team that Dalton was talking about is about, wave your hands technologically, about the size that a film brings to bear, roughly speaking, and how both the cadence of those events, they being 4 years apart, was true for films for us and elections as well. And within that 4-year span, what changes? Please see Alvy's graph for examples of how things change so fast. Mm-hmm. Often meant in my journey so far in business that a process that people bring to bear is often not appropriate for the entire run of a project and needs to be changed in the middle of it as circumstances change. Perhaps your business owner changes how you're funded, perhaps the size of team changes, technology available changes, creative demands change as well too. And so I've sort of taken the philosophy that the more flexible one is with the process you bring to bear, you are more likely to match the needs of the project that you have, as opposed to claiming we should all be lean, we should all not be lean, which I find is a common argument that goes on back and forth.
It's a little like, I remember Steve and I were debating several years ago this whole micromanagement versus delegation as a management style. And, oh, what's better, one's better, the other's better. And then a Harvard Business Review did a study and go, oh, well, the best managers, sometimes they're micromanagers, and sometimes they let people do what they want to do, and you just need to be adaptable. It's like, oh, it sounds a little bit like what you're talking about.
Well, I think as a couple folks have already mentioned, and I'm sure we'll talk about more in the next 2 days, the people involved themselves and their relationships, in a sense, dominate the process. And how the individual talents that you have on a team or on a crew, the talents what an individual brings to the game, how they interleave with each other, and how they're organized tends to emphasize or de-emphasize things. So there was a question earlier about the bozo infection from Apple.
Bozo explosion. And
there's the hero shithead roller coaster is a quote often discussed with Steve. People's success in individual jobs is a lot about individual talent and drive. It's about circumstance, situation, and other things that are external to the person as well too. So just because in this particular time, 3 years ago, Steve Robeck was doing awesome in that job you had then, does not necessarily mean you will do awesome in this job this year, given what the circumstances are around you, where you are in your life as well too. So appreciating that change can be helpful with an election or a film cycle when every 4 years it just happens again because it does. That means you get to recast the organization in a sense. Mm-hmm. Where sometimes things that are more static and longer term, it requires more effort to make sure you get that level of change that occurs so people can find everything they're meant to fit with.
So do you have an example of where, it sounds part of it is you want to be adaptable, so it's because, well, this is always the way we've done it, or this is the process, and the process doesn't work anymore. Can you give an example of where, in your experience, okay, this process doesn't work anymore. We need to move it. We need to change it.
One example that comes to mind is Toy Story 2. Should we get into that a little bit?
Oh, okay.
So first, a little bit of bragging. One of my shots in Toy Story 1 was in Alvy's slide deck. I'm super stoked about that. So thank you for putting that slide. But we'll go forward 5 years past that in a Toy Story 2. And that film began as a direct-to-video sequel, which Disney at the time was excited about doing and kind of shoveling them to Safeway store shelves at a 40-minute time frame. That project grew to be an hour long, then grew to an hour and a half long, then became a theatrical release. So in 4 different Disney negotiations and drives down to Cupertino to meet with Steve, we eventually convinced the powers that be that Toy Story 2 should become a theatrical release, and it landed on December of 1999. So it's the Y2K feature film for Disney. At the time, Bug's Life is going on, so most of the technical and creative talent at Pixar was focused on the 1988 release, which is A Bug's Life. And at the time that film came out, which is the fall and into winter of '98, those of us working on Toy Story 2, which was a smaller crew, felt that the film we're working on actually sucked. And that's a difficult challenge at that moment in the studio's history. We were a public company at that point in time. Bug's Life was coming out in the theaters plus or minus 2 weeks from now, which would hopefully prove to Wall Street we could make more than one film. Yeah. Toy Story 2 is a sequel project, which has legacy to the characters, the Buzz and Woody and the rest. And if we tank this movie, well, pretty much the franchise is tanked, the film's tanked, the company's probably toast. Like, I don't want that on my neck. That's probably not a good idea. But then what does one do? Because you're in a project at that point in time, and you've been working on it for 2 or 3 years, crew of 80, 100 people or so, and you take a look at, as best as you can see the end product to be, which in our case was story reels at the time, that film sucks. Like, that's, oh shit. So a very careful set of conversations with the directors and producers of the film itself happened, and we decided to go to the executive team and ask for help, as opposed to say, this film sucks, trench it, or this film's great, keep going, both of which aren't quite right, but help. What we're working on now, we think a year from now is not what you expect it to be, and that's going to put us all in a very complicated situation. So organizationally, to communicate that, and probably as Alvy alluded to, Steve can be a volatile personality sometimes. Some of those stories may in fact be true. And walking into that, you're not sure is the messenger going to get slayed or not, so you have to be prepared to take perhaps some heat in that conversation. But when it came down to it, I met with Ed, and Sarah MacArthur was VP of production at the time. It's now Jim Morris, who's head of production, and eventually Steve. And just communicated to them that I've been on this project for 3 years. I've been at Pixar at that point for nearly 10. And so I love this place. I'm feeling a part of it. I need you guys to know we need help. Please take a look at this project, and if whatever you need to do, but I think this film's not what we think it is. And many of us went to go do that, a couple, over the course of a few weeks. In December then, so Bugs had come out then, by December, we had the attention of the studio executives, looked over and realized this film actually is not so good. They took it, sort of shut down production across Christmas and New Year's. John, Andrew, Pete, and Jeff, and the writing team sort of went up to Napa for a week, locked themselves in a room, and first week in January came back and said, here's a new film. This is way better. And that meeting, I think, maybe most expresses one thing about, we talked about Steve a couple times today, but a particular thing that he did that I just wanted to mention because it doesn't get talked about a lot. And at the time, to make that change that late in production, we had 8 months to complete the film, starting from effectively ground zero. That's a 4-year project. Usually, that means we're all going to kill ourselves for the next 8 months to pull that off. Disney says, no way, you can't do it. Forget it, we're not going to fund it. Steve goes, forget you, we are going to fund it, because I say so, and this is a better project, we should do it. So he said it, clever setup about Disney saying we can't, we say we can, so I get that part. More importantly, though, in that particular meeting in the screening room in Frogtown in Point Richmond, Steve was able to speak the truth of the situation at that moment in about 1.5 or 2 minutes. Now, it's taken an hour to do it, but to comment, we are in the place where we have a film that we now can look at and say, this is not what we want to make. We know we can't make a better one. We are therefore compelled to go do it, regardless of what the other people down in Burbank say or don't say. Yeah. And we're going to go do that. Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about that before, how he could serve as an accelerant toward getting to where you guys needed to go quickly. Was he would just, in many of those meetings, just, okay, it's obvious. Here's what has to happen. And everyone go, yeah, it's got to happen.
Well, one of the craziest ones, is to change topics for a second. Do you remember CD-ROMs?
Yeah, remember.
Okay. So,
the new Papyrus.
So Toy Story comes out. Pixar's the interactive division. We fund that. That grows to a crew of, 30, 40, 50, 60 people. They make the Toy Story interactive storybook, which is the best-selling CD-ROM of all time.
We have that, yes.
Right. So Pixar wants to move into a new market. They get the talent to go do it. We build the product. We then have the #1 selling product in the market. We own the market. 3 months later in a meeting, thanks, guys. Congratulations. You did a great job. And we're out. So by Friday, you all find a job on Bug's Life for Toy Story 2. And we're like, what? Why do you kill? Well, because the market long term is not actually what we want to be in the end. Even though you actually dominate it worldwide, it's not worth being in it. So you have 4 days, maybe the producer find a new job. You all have a new job, it's fine. Like, just walk down the hall and ask Darla what to do.
But this thing's over.
And so Darla's calendar, wham, gets booked in 5-minute increments, and everybody was redeployed by Monday. Huh. Like, he just flipped the whole division over and melded it into Bugs Life production, and that happened from, like, Monday to Friday.
Yeah, I think that's right.
And,
we were talking about that under the auspices of the reality distortion field, how it's like, yeah, but sometimes he would impose reality very quickly.
Yeah, in this case, though, my view of Steve, and I never worked with him directly, so I worked for people who worked for Steve. I was sort of one level removed in most of my career there. Again, not commenting about the external press-facing and marketing agenda. Internally to Pixar, in my experience with him, when those sort of things happened, he would not accommodate a 3-month-long dramatic conversation that would massage the various nuances of it. No, you guys won the product in the market. That's great. We don't want to be it anymore. Here's a new gig for you. You're all talented. Great. By Friday, you're working over there. You're like, oh, I guess that means he's over. And but because he could speak that truth very directly, it meant the organization didn't thrash about it.
How often your new organization?
Yes.
Toy Talk.
Yes.
How often do you sort of think of that? How often are you doing that role? There was a recent thing I think we talked about where that probably happened. Here's what's happening, guys. We're going to do this.
To walk into that answer then, when you have a company that's starting as an idea and you have not yet taken external funding, so it's just, let's say, Steve and Oren are doing a startup right now on stage.
Excellent.
We can change our mind as we wish freely 3 times at lunch, and there's really no consequence to it, which is a very freeing part of that process. Maybe then we add a couple more friends in the audience, and there's 6 of us by dinner tonight working on a new startup. We can keep doing that for a bit of time. At the point, though, you go to raise money and investors get involved. Yeah. At that point, you're in some sense committed to what you're building or the direction you're heading. And there's an appropriate time to fund projects and not fund projects when you need the external resources. But the rate at which you can change with external capital involved is different than when it's not involved. And so that's a transition you got to kind of go through as Martin and I sort of wrote paperwork and started Toy Talk now about 21 months ago, whatever it was. We spent that summer, just the 2 of us, and found eventually the 6 people who founded the company together when we got funding. But as it was 2 to 6 across that summer, we could change ideas like 3 times a week, which we happily were able to do. That's a very freeing part of the process. But now, okay, we're going to start heading in a direction of a particular product and a particular technology to build. You raise capital, now suddenly you can't move that fast. And that may be appropriate because you need the resources to build a bigger thing. But having observed now having gone through that process, I'm perhaps going to quite appreciate how different those 2 situations really are.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, so we've got a number of people here, entrepreneurial, doing startups, have done startups, or building companies. And I'd like them to, you've had to go through some very different processes. I mean, you talk about your work at Pixar, now your work at Toy Talk. Fewer resources, smaller group, unproven product, people don't know who you are. Talk a little bit about, as you look at other organizations, other startups, the lessons you've learned in terms of process development. Is there anything where you go, look, whatever you do, make sure you do this, or make sure you don't do this? What are some practical takeaways based on your experience?
Interesting. So I'll answer for Toy Talk, and it has some relation to Pixar, but in a particular way. I'll start at Pixar. At Pixar, working on a film, you don't go out and do an audience survey of who wants a film about talking toys versus fish? What do you think? That never happens. So you have an idea that you want to work on, that the writing team approaches. They work on it for some time. And late in the process, you're showing a mostly finished project, either in Vegas or Sacramento or Fresno. You pick a screening room on a Tuesday. You poach it, slug your film in instead. And the audience goes, ooh, I get a preview. And then you with the audience for those 2 hours, and you get a bunch of survey cards. So that's fine. At the point of the survey cards, just throw them at the recycling bin. What you need to do is during the screening, sit in the front row and get it like the bicycle mirror in your helmet thing, so you can see backwards, and you got to watch their eyes. So the only time the audience can't lie to you in that experience is when they're actually watching the film. Are they tweeting, surfing Facebook on their laptops over here, whatever they're doing? Or are they paying attention, eyes open, and engaged? Or are they kissing their boyfriend or girlfriend? And that point is the truth of it. Have you engaged the audience in a film situation? To Toy Talk now, as we're working on a consumer-facing product in the family entertainment space, presented through an iPad. We're off in houses now. So we go call mom and dad, and we come to your house at 4 o'clock and show Toy Talk to your kids. And afterwards, we'll do all kinds of fancy surveys and ask them all kinds of fancy questions. All that really matters is that 8-year-old enjoyed the experience or didn't. And if they asked us about Angry Birds, we blew it.
Hey, wait, if they ask you about what?
Do you have Angry Birds in his iPad? Where's Angry Birds? You're like, okay.
Angry Birds,
okay.
yeah.
Or something else. Or are they like in the Toy Talk or not? And there's a truth in that experience that you can only get from eye-to-eye contact that just is not present. It's important to also do large-scale statistical studies of markets and understand what can sell and not sell, and I appreciate that as well, too. And certainly we engage that in Toy Talk. Ground truth is that the connection to the audience, to the user, to the customer has what you tried to communicate landed at all with them, and you have to be first person to experience that. Any distance one has from that means static enters the equation. And especially in a company as small as Toy Talk, now we're 20 people, to come back from a testing session at 4 o'clock on some Tuesday and Wednesday morning at 9, what happened yesterday? Oh, Emma loved us. She went for like 45 minutes talking back and forth to us, had a great time. What happened specifically? Well, in this particular part, and you can really get into that, which you kind of have to, else it becomes too abstract, I found. So making the time, even though I am the founder and the CEO of the company, so I have lots of busy meetings to go to and other stuff, you have to carve that time out to go be first person with your intended audience, your intended user. Otherwise, you just don't have a sense for it.
Well, okay, so end user as pole star, as sort of North Star for what you're trying to deliver for, correct?
Assuming you are a customer-facing product, so B2B for a second here, but yes, in that space.
Well, that's to be honest, that sort of leads me to one of the changes to the schedule, which I don't know if you've noticed. We're very fortunate to have Marco Netto joining us tomorrow, and one of the things as you'll hear him talk about is being very customer-focused. And in my brain, I hear two things from these very successful organizations. One is product focus, one is customer focus. They're not exactly the same thing. There's significant overlap, but there's debate as to which is the correct thing to be. And you
mean one to the exclusion of the other? I think that would be a bummer.
Well, I mean, if you say we're going to build the best darn movie we can that we like, because let's face it, that's really what it's about. I mean, many organizations are succeeding, building stuff for themselves. And luckily, it all worked. But then there's no. We are going to research. For example, Apple doesn't do focus groups.
Okay, so
they don't really,
perhaps controversial. I'm going to call bullshit on that for a second.
Okay.
Because that's like common that Apple just doesn't care. But let's rewind a couple years or perhaps a couple decades. In the mid '70s, we're hacking on some plywood Apple I at the Homebrew Computer Club, right? And Steve are nerding out about that. They go to the club, and that thing gets snatched out of their hands in the course of like a day and a half. They sell 50, and then the next 50.
That's feedback.
Okay. Some months later, we're going to do an Apple II with some plastic injection molding stuff. That thing gets ripped out of the Moscone Center floor. They sell out in like the course of the first half an hour, right? Should we all be so lucky to have products in our lives that are torn out of our hands at that rate? But at that point in Apple, what do you think Steve was doing? He was talking to people in Moscone's Convention Center, talking about the fact that they had 6 or 3 expansion boards because Wozniak wanted more and he wanted less. Right? That process was, in fact, him smashing into a customer, having at it on the Moscone Center, selling Apple IIs. Now let's fast forward 35 years. Should I have $100 billion in the bank one day and a design team run by Johnny Ive, I'm probably not going to spend time in Moscone Center floor talking to a bunch of people, right? But
it's a resource thing.
Partly, but maybe more, the institution of Apple has been at its product development cycles for so many years, so successfully at some time. They understand the market very well, to their credit. That takes a long time to find that talent, develop it, foster it, organize it, sequester it, move it forward, and present it. That's decades of effort, which is an extraordinary organization.
So what they ran under...
And that's great, like awesome, like Apple keep going, right? But
so they ran it under emulation for a while. Now it just runs natively. It's just burned into the ROMs.
And
it's also not true. A friend of mine was on an iPad focus group.
Scobell says
Scobell's jumping in.
Was on an iPad focus group.
They were sworn to secrecy, but they do focus
Hey, this takes us back to Maya Young's presentation, which is foster this illusion that it just sprouted from their heads.
Apple very
formed.
carefully controlled this image, also to Apple's credits, yes.
Okay. All right.
But I think the discussion about, well, Apple ignores users, that's not really true. And taking a look at any given organization, where it is in its life cycle and how it engages its potential customers or not is an important perspective missing in the conversation.
I see.
I think.
So let's
I'll
talk
throw that out there. Right.
In terms of process. So you launched this. You've got a vision for how the workflow should go, how the team should work, everything. You get the whole thing booted up. You're how long into it now with Toy Talk?
Since about 18 months or so.
Okay. So talk about in terms of process. What's the number one thing you go, oh yeah, we do that differently from when we started? It's a very,
boy. From when we started.
And Oren's going, I wish we had talked earlier about this question.
Oh,
Well, what is it where you went, gee, I really thought it would work this way, it didn't work, and now we have a different process now?
Interesting question.
I'm doing that thing you do on Halloween.
How to get feedback and reaction as soon as possible from your possible customers or your audience is important. With a product like Toy Talk that has a relatively long technology base to build before you can actually get to that point, that means you can't test it until you've invested that much time building that much technology. Finding ways to hack around that so that you can, 6, 9, 12 months before we're actually at a point now where I can take very early versions of what I have and put it in front of a child and start talking back and forth with them now. But rewind a year, how did that happen back then? Inevitably, you can hack it some way. And I was reminded by, what's Dalton's story? You hired a bunch of interns to run reports at 5 a.m. to hand you the printout to automate it, right? So you throw in actual people in a process, you can get very far very fast. I'm sorry, Harper said that. You can throw a couple of people into a process to reach forward a year or two in your schedule that you can never scale as a company that way. But you can still do it at some smaller way, and taking advantage of that and the actual body count you have in the building. Can we just make this up as a magic trick, in effect?
Yeah.
Now, to see what the end result would be if we could actually build this thing for real.
A simulation.
Very much so. And
Joseph's got a story about that. Simulation.
If you came to Toy Talk 12 months ago, we are simulating the experience of what that product works like. Man behind the curtain, like actual curtain, man behind the curtain for real. Presenting to folks who came into our office to see how it goes. Over the course of 9 months, we sort of cripple that illusion to the point that now technology stack is there, the creative work is actually there, the product comes together itself. Much like on a film, you watch storyboards first. You're kind of faking it in a sense. Yeah. But can you project forward at that point? Getting that reaction as soon as you can is important, but the process, to your point, changes very structurally along the way. Because the amount of resources you pour into it and what you present are different at each one of those steps. So you're kind of on that racetrack, but you have to know that you're going to build up the edifice of this curtain thing and then
you have to optimize for timing, staffing, and what you can reasonably show people.
Yeah, I mean, it's to quote Steve Blank, who I teach with at Cal and Stanford, what can you learn as fast as possible and get that in your heads? And without regard to the process of how you got it, just get that information back. And looking at it from that perspective, I think can be helpful.
All right, well, I want to make sure that we get on on track for lunch here. So we're going to go ahead and break now. I think you're going to be at a table. So all of our speakers are going to be at various tables. Hopefully you guys will distribute out and we'll get a chance so that people can ask questions of the various presenters. All right. I thank you. I thank Oren.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate it.
Thanks,